In this series, I like to review video game guns and then rank them in a tier list based on their overall design and attention to detail. For this video, we are once again looking at the guns in Fallout London. So far, we've looked at all the conventional firearms. There's been some pretty good and historically accurate guns, along with some that are total loads of baloney. If you haven't seen the previous videos, then make sure to check them out. I got a whole playlist which includes all my gun reviews, in case you want to binge them. But now, it's time we look at the other stuff that doesn't really fit into the conventional category. I'm talking about the miscellaneous stuff, the heavy weapons, the energy weapons, even the black powder guns. Let's go ahead and see how well these weapons can hold up against the scrutiny test. Let's start with my favorite category, the heavy weapons. First up is the Crude launcher. It's a handmade break-action projectile launcher, which is powered by a pneumatic system. In other words, it's an air cannon. Like, have you ever seen those handmade potato cannons? Well, this is basically the same thing, but instead of potatoes, it shoots big-ass harpoons at high velocity, so it's hitting a lot harder than a measly potato. Or at least it should be using harpoons. Your character very clearly loads in a harpoon, but when you pull the trigger, it shoots out rockets. It's like a magic trick. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense. And what's the point in having this whole pneumatic system if it's just gonna shoot self-propelled rockets? Well, turns out the original mod from Fallout 4 does shoot harpoons. It's only the Fallout London version that shoots rockets. I really don't get why the Fallout team decided to repurpose this air cannon into a rocket launcher, when they could have just included an actual rocket launcher, or a recoilless rifle, or any kind of projectile launcher really. You know, perhaps they could have included the infamous Piat launcher, or the Law 80, or come up with a new futuristic design from the 2070s. Better yet, just include all of them. Those could serve as the mid to late game launchers, while the Crude launcher would be the early game or the low budget option. But unfortunately, this is the only launcher in the whole game. Seriously, that's it. It's quite a huge missed opportunity. So hopefully they plan on adding some more launchers in a future update, because this one is trying to do way too much. It's trying to be an air cannon and a rocket launcher at the same time. So while the Crude launcher from Fallout London makes 0 sense, the original Skewer mod from Fallout 4 is pretty good. The overall design is believable, and it fits right into the post-apocalyptic world of Fallout. In this world where resources are scarce, it's pretty darn likely you'd have people make a bunch of air guns, especially in Britain where firearms are heavily regulated and very rare. Only the lucky few would be able to get their hands on some pre-war military weapons, while the rest would probably have to resort to making their own. And air guns would be a very popular option because they're so easy to make. All you need is a pressurized air canister, a tube, and a valve. This one is a bit more bougie than a typical PVC pipe air cannon though. Instead of having a typical valve handle to release the pressure, it has a motorcycle clutch lever that serves as a trigger. Also, the forward grip and the top lever are motorcycle grips. Even better, the pistol grip is welded on backwards, which suggests that whoever put this thing together was very drunk while doing so. I mean, that should be obvious. You'd have to be off your rocker to make an air-powered harpoon launcher in the first place. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I'm just saying it's kind of ridiculous. But it's also very badass, and I would love to have one. By default, there are no sights, but you can add on a makeshift Mercedes-Benz logo to serve as a rudimentary sighting system. There's also a scope attachment, where the reticle was marked onto the lens by a red marker. And of course, you can attach a bayonet in case you want to stab people with it. Probably not a good idea, but if you're crazy enough to wield this thing, then you might as well go all in. But if you prefer defense, then you can attach a stop sign to serve as a bullet shield. Would this actually stop bullets though? No. I mean, maybe like a 22, but anything above that would rip right through this thin sheet metal. It's still funny nonetheless, so I'll let it slide. It's also pretty cool how you can load it up with specialized harpoons. You've got barbed skewers, poison skewers, flechettes even, explosive tip skewers, even stim pack skewers, so you can heal your companions by blasting them in the face with a harpoon. I think my favorite part is the rotary magazine attachment, which says a big ol' fuck off on the side. The reload animation is completely broken though. The magazine doesn't budge, but your character still motions their hand as if they're reloading. This is only a problem with the Fallout London version though. The original mod works just fine. So overall, this design is friggin' awesome, and it's downright hilarious. But there is one main thing I would change. I would make it into a muzzle loader instead of a break-action breech loader. Not only would that make it even simpler, but it would allow you to load in those special harpoons. Some of these unique harpoons have tips wider than the shaft, so these specific harpoons would not be able to fit through the bore. You would have to load them from the muzzle. But what's even more important is that you need an airtight seal for it to work effectively. But with this handmade break action, I really doubt that it's airtight when you close it shut. There's probably a little gap there, so a bunch of escaping air would blast you right in the face face when you shoot it. Like, there's a good reason why air cannons are muzzle loaders with fixed barrels. It's just way easier and a lot safer to make it that way. So either way you look at it, this thing should be a muzzle loader. But the main reason why it's not is because it's reusing animations from the Fallout 4 break-action missile launcher. So if you could give this thing custom animations, then yes, a muzzle loading design would work much better. I'm also wondering how many shots this thing would last before you had to repressurize or replace the air canister. It's not like this is an infinite fuel source. Once you shoot that air, it's gone, so you do have to fill it back up. I don't know what exactly the math is or what PSI this gun would need to shoot at, but this is quite a heavy projectile that's moving pretty damn fast, so that would require a whole lot of highly pressurized air. You probably have to refill the canister after every single shot, so it would be a lot more immersive if your character had something to repressurize the canister during the reload. But like I said, it's reusing vanilla animations, so that doesn't happen. Instead, you get a magical canister that has infinite air. It could use a new firing sound too. It's reusing sounds from the Fallout 4 harpoon launcher, so it makes a loud metal clank when firing. This is an air cannon though, so it should sound more like a psst rather than a clunk. The concept and overall design of the Crude launcher, or the Skewer, is pretty awesome. It fits perfectly into Fallout. But the main thing holding it back is the lack of custom animations. The Fallout London version specifically is really dumb because it shoots harpoons that magically transform into rockets. So, if I were to rank only this version, I would put it in F tier with 0 bottle caps. But if I'm ranking the original Skewer mod, then I'm giving it 3 bottle caps with a spot in the meme tier. Before we go any further, I gotta talk about today's sponsor, War Thunder. Are you a big fan of badass military vehicles? Do you wish you could operate them, but you were born in the wrong generation? Well, I have good news. War Thunder will make your dreams come true. War Thunder is an epic vehicular combat game in which you engage in large-scale multiplayer battles and take command of all kinds of cool vehicles. Planes, tanks, warships, and helicopters, all from every time period in every major country. There's over 2,500 in total. You name it, War Thunder has probably got it. The atmosphere is pretty darn immersive too. The graphics and the attention to detail, the beefy and crisp sounds, and of course, the brutally realistic gameplay. This ain't no typical shooter with generic health bars. You gotta target critical weak spots in order to deal considerable damage. If you do it right, you can take out a tank and its whole crew with a single well-placed shot. But if you don't know what you're doing, then your shots will probably glance off and do nothing. So it's really important to look at the vehicle x-rays to see where the weak points are, then aim accordingly. There's quite a learning curve, but once you learn the language of War Thunder, it can be very rewarding, maybe even a little bit addicting. War Thunder is free to play on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, and just recently, they added it to mobile devices too, so now you can feed your War Thunder addiction, even while on the go. Anyway, you can download War Thunder right now by using either of my links in the description. All new and returning players on PC and console will receive an epic bonus pack that gives you all kinds of in-game goodies. Next, we have the legendary M2 Flamethrower, which is called the Angel Flamer here in Fallout London. The model is very accurate, but there's still some video game nonsense going on. The fuel lasts for an absurdly long time. You can rain down flames for a minute straight, but in reality, there's only enough fuel to last for about 8 seconds of continuous fire. After that, you've got to refuel the tank, or switch it out. In-game though, your character simply holds the flamethrower to the side, and then it magically reloads itself. I totally understand this is a game, and it wouldn't be very fun if you could only use the flamethrower for like 8 seconds before you had to throw it out. But still, I think they could have implemented the capacity and the reload in a much more immersive way. I also find it pretty interesting that you can switch the fuel types, and each one has a different doohickey that goes along with it. By default, it uses gasoline, but you can upgrade to napalm for extra range and burn damage, herbicide for radiation damage, or even jet fuel for melting steel beams. But switching fuel types doesn't actually change the fuel that you use. No matter what, you always use the generic flamer fuel ammunition. The fuel types are treated as attachments to the weapon, rather than individual fuel types. Besides that, I really appreciate that the range is very accurate to real life. A lot of games like to limit flamethrowers to like 15 feet, which makes them pretty awful to use. But in reality, the M2 Flamethrower can reach up to 60 feet with napalm. And in Fallout London, this one has a max range of about 60 feet, so that's very accurate. The range for the gasoline is much shorter though, but that's very realistic. Napalm is always going to have more range than gasoline. I'm glad to see they didn't nerf the range, because that means it's a super useful weapon for close range, rather than being a point-blank gimmick. I do feel like the damage could be increased though, like, it's not bad as is. It can melt hooligans pretty quick, but it should be melting them a little bit quicker. With napalm especially, you only need one quick burst to cook their meat. And a good way to balance that out is to lower the fuel capacity. So, you might have to reload a lot more often, but you're doing a lot more damage in return. I also enjoy the personal touches added here. The Hans variant especially is pretty funny. It's got all kinds of extra doohickeys, including a jet inhaler and a smoking cigarette on the tip. The traditional M2 tanks were also swapped out with a jerry can. Man, it looks like this thing was slapped together by a drug addict. And funnily enough, this legendary variant does more damage when suffering from withdrawal. Overall, this is a pretty epic flamethrower. All it needs is a slight balance adjustment, individual fuel types, and a different reload animation. If you fix those three things, then it would be perfect. But I also have to mention, why would they include an American M2 in the first place, when this takes place in Britain? It would be much more fitting for them to use the British life buoy instead. It's even weirder that they have an upgrade for the M2 that mimics the look of the life buoy, and that just looks cursed. It's like they wanted to include the life buoy, but for some reason they used the M2 as a base, and then they gave it a body kit. I don't know, man, it's weird. I'm a little disappointed we didn't get a genuine British life buoy. For that, I will give them -2 bottle caps with a spot in the Abyss tier. But when it comes to the M2 itself, I say it's worthy of 3.5 bottle caps with a spot in the B tier. And that concludes all the heavy weapons. Yep, there's only 2. Well, maybe 5 in total if you want to count the machine guns as heavy weapons. But either way, that's not a lot, and I find the lack of heavy weapons very disturbing. But let's go ahead and move on to the energy weapons before I get angry. First up is the Zap Gun, which is a makeshift laser gun. Basically, it's the laser counterpart to the Fallout 4 pipe gun, and it's about on the same level of ugliness too. It's just an amalgamation of garbage and random sci-fi tech that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It looks like the laser gun version of the Smith & Methson. I can totally get down with the trashy aesthetic for some guns, like with the Crude revolver from earlier. It feels like a legit makeshift gun. But for a handmade laser gun, I don't know. I feel like this advanced technology should look a little bit more refined, rather than looking like it just got taken out of a dumpster. This thing wouldn't actually work either. Probably. I can't say for sure because I'm not an expert on laser guns, and sadly, I do not own one. Not yet. But what I know for sure is that this laser gun is a complete fraud because it's not shooting lasers. I know I've had to go over this multiple times on this channel, but that's because most games tend to get laser guns completely wrong. They often show laser guns having projectiles with noticeable travel time, but that's not how lasers work. Lasers shoot out beams of light, which travel at the speed of light. There shouldn't be any perceivable travel time. Functionally, laser guns are just like typical laser pointers, just with 1 million times more power. But like many others, this so-called laser gun ain't shooting lasers. It looks like it's shooting bolts of plasma. This thing kicks like a mule too. But lasers don't produce recoil. They deal damage through heat, not kinetic energy. There's also this upgrade that makes it shoot out super slow-moving orbs of energy, which further suggests that this is actually a plasma thrower, not a laser gun. So the fact that this laser gun isn't shooting lasers should tell you enough on how functional this design would be in real life. Although this design is a complete failure, I don't hate it that much. I do appreciate the creativity and all the attachments and customization. There's an absurd amount of combinations you can make here. By default, it starts out as a wimpy bolt-action pistol, but you can upgrade it into a full-auto machine gun laser, or a shotgun, or even a sniper. It's pretty darn versatile, and I really love how you can turn it into whatever you want. I don't get why an energy weapon would have to be a bolt action in the first place though, especially with a laser gun. There's no physical mass that needs to be cycled into a chamber. It's not like that's being used to charge up the gun either, because it's powered by nuclear fusion cells, not mechanical energy. But again, this laser gun isn't a laser gun, so none of this is gonna make sense. I'm guessing it was made as a bolt action to gamify it and give you a sense of progression. Like at low levels, the DPS is absolutely abysmal. It's probably the worst gun in the whole game. But after you level up a bunch, you can upgrade it and make it pretty powerful. I do like the concept here. It's cool to have a handmade laser gun in Fallout, but this design in particular isn't too hot. I say the Zap Gun is worthy of 1 bottle cap with a spot in D tier. Up next is the Upton Burke laser gun. Basically, it's a reskin of the Fallout 4 laser gun. It has the same layout, the same animations, and the same problem with it not being a real laser gun, because it's not shooting beams of light. It looks like it's shooting bolts of plasma, but it's still called a laser gun. So already, this gun isn't looking too good, because it shares the same problems as the Fallout 4 laser gun. It has the same overall cartoonish aesthetic too. It looks comically oversized and bumbly. It looks more like a toy, rather than a deadly weapon capable of burning holes through people. It's also kind of funny how this super advanced laser gun doesn't come with any sights by default. It's like they put all this effort into making this super advanced energy weapon, but they forgot to give it an advanced sighting system to match. I mean, to be fair, some guns don't come with sights right out of the box, so you do have to add irons or a sight yourself. I still think it's pretty silly that you can use this advanced laser gun without sights though. I don't have much else to add here. Like I said, it's just a reskin of the Fallout 4 laser gun. An ugly reskin at that. It's honestly on the same level as the Institute gun. I hate to say it, but I must condemn the Upton Burke to F tier with 0 bottle caps. Now let's look at a real plasma gun that isn't pretending to be a laser gun. This one is simply called the Plasma Pistol. I really like the overall design here. It's not littered with a whole bunch of random sci-fi nonsense. It looks sleek and simple. It looks like they used a revolver as a base, then gave it a big old cannon-like barrel on the front end to make it shoot plasma, I guess. But perhaps it's too much like a revolver. It reuses animations from the Fallout 4 revolver, so the animations don't fit this gun at all. It looks jank as hell. It's especially goofy when you whip it out and try to spin the cylinder. It makes the sound too, which made me burst out laughing the first time I equipped this gun. The hammer animation is also completely broken. After you shoot, the hammer slowly pulls itself back into a single action position. It makes it look like this gun is possessed. And obviously, that's not how double action revolvers work. The hammer doesn't move after you shoot. The hammer moves as you pull the trigger. And I'm not sure why this plasma gun would need a hammer in the first place. Like, does it need to strike the primer on a plasma cartridge to ignite? I'd assume that energy weapons would use electricity to make the gun go pew. And speaking of pew, this gun does have quite a satisfying pew pew sound. But the jankiest part about this gun is that it completely lacks a front sight, so it'd be really hard to be accurate with it. But even worse, the rear sight is completely misaligned from your point of aim. This thing shoots way too high. The windage is off too, so you have to shoot to the center left of their torso in order to get a headshot. So it's basically a hard requirement to upgrade to the reflex sight. Also, if you upgrade to the rapid fire receiver, it can shoot insanely fast. There is no cap on it, so you can spam as fast as you can click. I do appreciate that, but the firing animation can't keep up with the fire rate. If you shoot too fast, it'll cut off the recoil animation, which makes it really jarring, almost nauseating to shoot. I'm also wondering why this plasma gun is using a fusion cell, when plasma guns should be using plasma cartridges. To be fair, that's how it worked in the older Fallout games. But I actually like the idea that plasma guns should have their own unique ammunition, rather than sharing the same stuff as the laser guns. Well actually, it is using plasma cartridges. That's what it's coded to use. But for the model itself, you very clearly load it with fusion cells. It's really confusing. On the surface, this gun looks pretty clean, but on the inside, it's absolutely filthy. With custom animations and some quality control, the plasma pistol could be a pretty solid design, but as is, it's really stinky. I'll have to give the plasma pistol 1 bottle cap, with the spot in the D tier. Now, let's look at the Gauss Rifle. This one in particular is the M72 Gauss Rifle, which appeared in Fallout 2 and Fallout Tactics. It's quite a faithful recreation, and it's pretty cool to see the M72 in a 3D Fallout game. That being said, I'm still not a huge fan of the overall look. It has that goofy, cartoonish vibe to it. Out of the 3 Gauss guns that have appeared in Fallout, this one is honestly my least favorite in terms of aesthetics. Looks aside, the functionality here is pretty legit. This gun uses the power of electromagnetism to send a 2mm projectile at extremely high speeds. There's 2 types of electromagnetic guns: railguns and coil guns. Railguns have rails, and coil guns have coils. This one has coils, so it's a coil gun. Or you can call it a Gauss gun. Same thing. Handheld Gauss guns are a real thing, by the way. They're still in the early prototype stages, so they're not very effective, but they do work. In the future, it's very possible they could be as powerful as the Gauss guns we see in movies and video games. I bet this particular design could be replicated in real life. Maybe with a few adjustments though. But it's got coils, it's got a battery, so it seems pretty legit. I also appreciate how it functions in-game. A lot of games will force you to manually charge up a railgun or a Gauss gun before firing. Like you have to hold down the trigger, then release it to shoot. It's really annoying because it messes up your aim, and once you charge it up, there's no backing out. That's not how Gauss guns work though. In reality, the power builds up passively. You pull the trigger to shoot, then you have to wait till it's fully charged again. You don't pull the trigger to charge the gun though. The battery does that by itself. I'm glad to say that's exactly how the Gauss gun works in Fallout London. There's no manual charging nonsense that's going on. You simply wait a second, then tap the trigger to shoot. It may feel a bit weird since you have to wait for the gun to charge up before shooting it, but that's how Gauss guns work, so that's actually very immersive. I'm not sure how realistic the blue beam and firing sound is though. Currently, that's not what firing a Gauss gun looks or sounds like, but maybe that'll change as they get more powerful in the future. I do think it's a neat way to convey just how fast that projectile is moving. Like, there's a whole lot of energy coming out that barrel. Gauss guns are pretty weak right now. They can only shoot at about 250 feet per second. But in the future, they might be shooting at 10,000 feet per second or even more. So I think this Gauss gun should have a whole lot more recoil to convey just how much energy is being transferred. As is, the recoil is pretty lame. It feels like you're shooting a 5.56, but this big blast of energy would probably have recoil closer to an elephant gun. Overall, this is a pretty solid Gauss gun. It just needs a major facelift and a new firing animation. Then it would be perfect. I say the M72 Gauss Rifle is worthy of 3.5 bottle caps. It goes in the B tier. Next is the Flower Power. I don't know what the fuck this thing is supposed to be. It looks like a magic staff from Skyrim. It's even got a soul gem on the front end of it. As the name suggests, it literally runs on flower power, and it uses that power to shoot out waves of radiation. Basically, it's the same effect as the gamma gun from Fallout 4. Yet, it handles and functions like the Gatling laser for some reason. Seriously, it reuses animations from the Gatling laser, so you handle it like a big-ass heavy weapon, despite it being a magical staff. The reload in particular looks hilariously stupid, but what's even goofier is that it has to spin up before firing. It even borrows the same sound. I think it goes without saying, but having to spin up a magical irradiated flower staff is absolutely ridiculous. This thing ain't no Gatling gun with rotating barrels. And Gatling guns don't have to spin up to fire in the first place. That's a Hollywood myth. So either way, this thing should be shooting instantly. Like, come on, it's a freaking magic staff. It even has a magical floating green dot for enhanced precision. There's no optic here, it's literally just a floating green dot. This thing is made of pure magic though, so whatever, I'll let it slide. I don't know what's up with the axe head on the front end though. It doesn't actually do anything. It would be pretty epic if your character used it for the melee attack, but they don't. You just slap them with the rear end of the staff. I don't know what the hell the lore behind this thing is supposed to be, or how they would justify its existence. Like, I know Fallout has plenty of science fiction stuff, but this is pure fantasy magic, so perhaps it would work better in Elder Scrolls, not Fallout. Maybe if they gave it custom animations and a unique magical effect, I would enjoy it more. But as is, it's just a boring, reskinned asset flip. And it's super ugly too. So I say the Flower Power belongs in F tier with 0 bottle caps. If it were Skyrim though, I'd probably give it a single septum. That's it for all the futuristic energy guns. Now we ought to go back in time with the ancient black powder musket. You already know, they had to include a musket. This is Britain after all. I'm not entirely sure which model this is supposed to be though. I compared this to just about every British musket I could find, and there wasn't a single match. The engraving says it's a Schmidtworth made in Birmingham.
Oi, is that Birmingham you say? This thing ought to be called a shitworth there, right?
But in all seriousness, I couldn't find anything about a Schmidtworth rifle. The closest thing to that is the Whitworth rifle, so maybe that's the reference. But it's also completely different, visually and functionally. That one uses percussion caps, while this one is a flintlock. So while this model is fictitious, it still looks like a functional musket. Perhaps it's supposed to be an in-universe 21st century reproduction. It may seem odd for it to have 2 triggers, but that's a real feature called a double set trigger. The front trigger is used to make the gun go boom, while the rear trigger is used to set the main trigger. Setting the trigger means you lighten the trigger pull, and a lighter trigger pull makes it more accurate. You can't actually use that feature in game, but it's a cool detail nonetheless. The reload is quite peculiar though. Normally with a flintlock musket, you have these paper cartridges that contain both the projectile and the powder. You tear off the cartridge, pour a bit of powder into the pan, then put the rest down the barrel along with the ball, and finally you pack it all down with the ramrod. But with this musket, your character doesn't use cartridges. They whip out a whole container of gunpowder. That still works, but it can be a little bit dangerous. By not using a properly measured flask or cartridge, you could mistakenly pour too little or too much powder, and if you use too much, the gun may explode. So if you're gonna do this, you better have a really good idea of how much gunpowder you're using. But I suppose this makes sense, seeing as this game takes place after the apocalypse. There's probably not many musket enthusiasts going around making proper black powder cartridges, or teaching people proper musket etiquette. So if that's the intention here, then that's actually a pretty cool detail. What can't be excused though, is that you don't shove the ramrod all the way down. So chances are, this ball is stuck about halfway down the barrel. With a ramrod, you gotta go balls deep. There's no room for half measures. If you fail to go balls deep, then you may not be able to blow your load properly. I do wish we had a real historical musket here, but this one is pretty solid. It's also damn fun to use in-game. Styling on hooligans with a black powder musket is absolutely hilarious. I say this musket is worthy of 4 bottle caps. It belongs in the A tier. I'll do the same for the flintlock pistol as well. It's literally the same thing, just in pistol form, so I don't see a reason to review it separately. Next is the Blunderbuss, which is basically the shotgun version of the musket. So everything I said about the musket already applies to this one. The main difference here is that you can load it with random junk. Scrap metal, cigarettes, teddy bears, bowling balls even. As long as it's in the junk category, you can shoot it. It's freaking hilarious. It doesn't matter if the junk is way bigger than the bore. You can still shove it down the barrel and shoot it anyway. It simply defies all physics for the sake of it being funny as fuck. So basically, this is the British version of the junk jet. And dare I say, it's leagues above the junk jet. It's downright awesome in every way. So I say the Blunderbuss is worthy of 5 bottle caps. It deserves a spot in the legendary meme tier. Lastly, we have the laser musket. Don't worry, it's not the goofy wind-up toy from Fallout 4. This one takes the term very seriously, like it's a full-on musket. Not so much a laser gun though. Once again, it seems like this laser gun is completely mislabeled. You clearly load it with a ball and powder, so it's not shooting beams of light. This looks like an electromagnetic assisted firearm. In other words, it's a chem rail, or perhaps you'd call this one a chem coil, since it has coils. You see, a chem rail is a hybrid between an electromagnetic gun and a typical powder-based firearm. The ammunition still utilizes cartridges with powder to initially launch the projectile, but it also has electromagnetic parts to help drive the projectile to higher speeds. It's a pretty genius idea. You're getting the power of the chemical-based cartridge and the power of the electromagnetic system all in one package. That's like double the power. It's pretty awesome to see this technology used in Fallout London, on a fucking musket no less. It's like the Bubba build to end all Bubba builds. Nobody can top this modded monster. I can only imagine what madman put this shit together. Like out of all of the guns they could have chosen to upgrade, they chose a musket. The maker of this gun may be a mad scientist, but he's also an exquisite gentleman who enjoys antique firearms. I quite enjoy this gun too. It's like the perfect gun to represent Fallout London. Really, the only thing wrong with it is the name. It shouldn't be called a laser musket if it's not shooting lasers. Perhaps they should have called it the rail musket or the coil musket. That would be a much more fitting name. Overall, very awesome concept here. I freaking love it. Although it's not perfect, I'm gonna give this so-called laser musket a whopping 6 bottle caps. It deserves a spot at the very top in the GOAT tier. Finally, that wraps up every single gun in Fallout London, and this is the true finalized tier list. As you can see, there's quite a variety in the ratings. There's quite a lot of guns that are very realistic, a few that are just plain awesome or hilarious, along with some that are stinky doo-doo. Most of the guns are on the top half of the tier list though, so I consider that a huge win. For a free mod especially, it's some fine work, but there's also plenty of room for improvement. I would certainly trust these guys to make the guns for Fallout 5 over Bethesda. Anyway guys, that's all for this video, and that's it for Fallout London 2. Now that we're done, it's time to move on to something else. Which game will that be? I guess you'll just have to see. Stay tuned, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Before we go, I have to give a humongous thanks to the guys at War Thunder for sponsoring the channel yet again. Their support allows me to keep making these epic videos for y'all. And remember, you can check out War Thunder by using my links down below, which will also give a free bonus pack to all new and returning players that are on PC or console.